Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are taking a look at the Spark build and Inquisitor Templar guide for your league start for the upcoming 3.9 Metamorph League. So if you are interested in playing a Sparker, maybe you've chatted with someone from an earlier time in Path of Exile's history when Spark dominated the meta, and anybody that wanted to have speedy zoom fast mapping was playing Spark. Then of course throughout the history of Path of Exile we had the Vol update, where Vol Jewels and Vol Spells really spiked in their power, and Vol Spark became just yet again another version of Spark that was incredibly strong. Well, I think with the new way that Shock is going to be interacting with monster health, and with the ability for Spark to have lots of small hits bouncing around and dealing damages to enemies all over the place, especially with the updated physics for arrows that are coming down the line with 3.9. I think as updated physics continue to grow for projectiles and for various skills that can bounce, Spark is going to be the one of the skills that benefits greatly from this sort of update. So all that being said, I've been fascinated with Spark for the last year or so, and I've been playing it off and on, and I would highly recommend it for you to try out here as a league starter. So all of that set aside, you can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell for more videos just like this one. And today we're going to take a look and start off with some gameplay footage of what Spark looks like in a Tier 15 Blighted map. So this is from 3.8, and of course the only things that will have changed from this build coming into 3.9 are that, well, Shock in and of itself has been buffed and received some changes in light of the way how monsters' health and resistances interact. So I think this is probably my favorite Spark POB and my favorite Spark path of building tree that I've seen thus far, and that's one of the reasons why I'm recommending it to you. It's an incredibly defensively oriented build, and yet it pumps out a ton of damage. You can see as you've got Spark going, it goes out in every single direction in Nova thanks to its threshold jewels, which means you can become a living turret, whether that's in Blighted maps or whether that's in any other style of content. You can simply either leap slam, flame dash your way around, lightning warp even if you'd like to, and then as you are blowing up various enemies, you'll have a chance to charge up your Vol Spark, and then you can release that on a boss, release it on a particularly large pack, and clear very quickly. So that's just a small smidgen of the gameplay of what Spark looks like. Of course, you can go give Fun Elite a ding and a subscribe. That's what I'm going to do right now. He's got 104 subscribers, so let's go show him some love for this wonderful build guide that he's put together. So really quickly looking over the pros and cons, and then we'll take a look at his path of building. The pros and the cons are that it's tanky, it's got good clear speed, it's an easy blight killing build, which means if you would like to interact with blight, which now has a 10% chance to spawn on maps, if you want to do that, or you want to buy early on blight maps in order to stockpile oils for yourself or to sell, you can do that. And then of course there's no need to aim. You don't have to be any kind of accurate. Really your mouse cursor and your movement needs to stay on top of your character, which means that in a game like Path of Exile, where we're going to be playing boss killing leagues here with Metamorph, it means that staying on top of your mouse and your mouse micromanagement is very important, because we've got a lot of different bosses who are going to have one-shots available to them. So the fact that you don't need to aim means that you can pay a little bit more attention to your own positioning and a little bit less to where exactly all of your projectiles are going, because Spark will clear and will cover the area anyway. If you can get a boss to go over into a corner and follow you into a corner, they will just get sparked to death. Now, the cons on this particular build is that the minimum budget for this to feel good for this particular version of the build is about 5x, and that was as of this previous league. So he used about 15x on his gear, Leet Fun did, and that's where he gets to as he's clearing the Uber Elder and as he's crushing tier 15 maps. So it's a relatively expensive build. The reason why I recommend it to you as a starter is that I myself have personally league started with Spark in the past with no gear whatsoever. It's a league start, fresh league start, and I've taken it all the way up to level 85, I think is when I ripped, or 84, with just basically solo self-found gear between myself and between Beckett in a hardcore league. So very, very easy to gear for, can be very, very defensive as you want it to. There's a lot of great layers of defenses included in this particular build. Here's a couple of them. The tankiness of the build mainly comes from good regen, leech, block, and a decent size HP pool. Now, your HP pool probably over the course of the opening week to weekend is not going to reach 7 to 8k. Again, that's at the top end of this particular build. However, when you combine things like Leech from Vitality Watcher's Eye, and of course Energy Shield Leech support, and then you've got Regen from the Inquisitor Ascendancy, and then you've got Block through the Dust Dawn and the Stone of Lazwar, as well as the Tree. There's a lot of different ways that you can see that you are stacking layers of defenses. You're not just relying on one particular form of defense and then just going all out for that. You are relying on several different layers, which for those of you who play hardcore or simply want to push a character very, very far while losing as little XP as possible, you know this is a very, very reliable method in Path of Exile to play defensively by stacking up layers of defenses in order to account for when one layer fails, another layer can pick up. Now, taking a look at the path of building tree, it's a fairly straightforward Templar tree when you think about it. So, defensively, you're going to want to come all the way down to the Scion tree in order to pick up Constitution. Generally, I just go down there as I'm able to go down and pick up Constitution, and then I'll fill in those 5% lives once I've got the two sides actually filled out. The sides, the wings on this particular formation of the tree is the way how things are going to scale your damage. And so if you're playing hardcore, go down for Constitution first and then fill in that entire Scion life wheel. If you're not playing hardcore, or if you feel like you've got good enough gear that you don't necessarily need all of the HP, then you can just straight up go for the damage on either of the wings. Now, the wing on towards the shadow side of the tree is of course a lot of your crit. This is where we're picking up coordination, cast speed, as well as trickery, which is crit, and then damage, and then lethal assault, which is again increased damage, projectile speed, which is really nice, area of effect, and resourcefulness, which gives us a little bit of defensiveness, but mostly over here what we're really looking at is assassination, which is 35% to critical strike multi and 30% increased critical strike chance. That's a lot of damage that you're going to pull in from over on the right hand side of the tree. Up towards the middle of the witch tree, there's of course cruel preparation, which is going to give us some life and some resistances. Up towards the middle of the witch tree is where Leet Fun puts his hazardous research jewel. This is of course a mandatory jewel if you're going to play Spark. It's very, very helpful simply because you get 2 additional projectiles that are coming out. Notice, because I always have to point this out to new players as they're playing Path of Exile for the first time with threshold jewels. Some jewels will say with at least 40 intelligence allocated in radius, and some threshold jewels will say with at least 40 intelligence in the radius. So if it says in radius, that just means that there has to be a total of 40 intelligence, which there's a bunch of intelligence here, what, 60, 70, 80 intelligence within the radius of the jewel. It does not mean you need to have it allocated. It just means that it needs to be in one of those particular jewel slots that has those desired stats available in the radius, not allocated in the radius, right? So, for instance, this particular flat 10 to intelligence node counts towards that. This particular 10 counts towards that as being in radius. That's what this green circle shows, that all of those are in radius and therefore it counts. And this is where we get the additional bonus from the threshold jewel that Spark is firing 2 additional projectiles. You could put hazardous research anywhere, but if it doesn't have at least 40 intelligence in radius, it's not going to fire those additional 2 projectiles. You'll just be getting the reduced spark duration and the increased lightning damage, which is okay, but you definitely want the 2 additional projectiles. It's great. And you can use 2 of those if you so choose to do so. Over on the left-hand side of the tree, of course, this is a more defensive-styled build of Spark. Again, this is one of the reasons why I think Spark is so great. You can build it to go fast, to clear a whole lot of maps really early on and build a bunch of currency, as well as be tanky for not that much investment. So you can go MOM, So that way you've got a large pool of mana that counts as additional health. And then you're going to come all the way down to Sanctity to give yourself some armor to help out with that defensive layering. You're going to pick up Light of Divinity to increase spell damage, Holy Domination, and then you're going to come all the way over to Counterweight because this is a build that uses staves. So many people do not like using staves. Guess what? This is going to be a cheaper part of the build because not a whole lot of people like using staves. This is an exceptional build for clear speed. It's good for bosses that are engaged in a room or in an area where you can bounce your projectiles off of. And it's going to be a relatively cheap build to get off the ground. I say relatively cheap because I doubt on day 1 and day 2 of the league, people are really going to be going all out on staff builds. But you never know. So I take that with a grain of salt. You know, it could be that it ends up not being quite as cheap as we thought because maybe more people will play staff builds this league. Okay, our Spark is linked with added lightning damage, increased critical strikes, energy, leech, spell echo, and pierce. There are a whole bunch of ways that you can set up your Spark depending on what it is that you are doing. If you want to do bossing versus if you want to do clear versus if you want to scale your damage in one particular element versus if you want to try to do some other sorts of elemental conversion, you can do that. There's a whole bunch of options, and that's, again, one of the reasons that Spark is so fun. It's got a lot of flexibility built into it. You can change your build based on the gear that you're finding, but this is a solid way to go as a base recommendation, to go added lightning, increased critical strikes, energy, leech, spell, echo, and pierce. Now, the only other thing that I'm going to say is on this particular build is to pay attention to the auras. He's got Zealotry hooked up with Vitality along with Herald of Ice. Those of you who don't know, Herald of Ice is an incredibly great defensive mechanic because you can freeze stuff, right? So because of the way that we are building this particular character, our Spark is actually going to be able to freeze enemies, which is a great defensive layer because if your enemies are frozen, they can't be doing damage to you. So I would just throw that out there. That's incredibly important that you get Herald of Ice incorporated into your build, that you do not neglect it. In terms of items, this is what we're using. We're using the Dust Dawn Maelstrom Staff. It gives you a whole bunch of additional increased critical strike chance for spells. It gives you 20% of elemental damage as extra chaos damage, and then it gives you a whole bunch of critical strike multi per 1% chance to block on attack damage, and then gives you a whole bunch of critical strike multiplier if you've dealt a non-crit recently, and then a whole bunch of increased spell damage if you've crit recently. So, of course, going with a Templar, it's going to be very, very strong for critting. Now, in your helmet, you're going with the Devouring Diadem, which is really nice because it gives you +1 to level of socketed gems, as well as gives you Feast of Flesh every 5 seconds, and it's an energy shield helmet, which we are stacking both life as well as a bit of energy shield on the build. For the chest piece, what you're looking for is basically just energy shield, as much energy shield and intelligence as you can get onto your body armor. It's going to be very, very important. Then, for your gloves, you're going to be looking at the Winds of Change Ancient Gauntlets. This gives a decent amount of life, but it also gives projectile speed as well as movement speed. And then it also gives a chance to knock enemies back on hit with projectile damage, which is pretty nice considering Spark is a projectile skill. Boots, you're just looking for life, movement, and resistances. The amulet is, once again, the Stone of Lasware, which gives you some chance to block spell damage and increased cast speed, both of which are nice quality of life items. And then with your rings, you're mostly looking to fill these out with life and resistances, but if you're able to get damage on here, this is where the build gets relatively pricey because you're looking for aspect of the spider as well as, of course, adding cold or lightning damage onto your rings. Assassin's Mark on hit is a very, very valuable curse to have on your ring. This is not something to worry about league start. This is something to aim for as you progress your build. The belt, of course, will be a Stygian Vise. Is there a better rare belt out there? I know that for the most part, some builds might need like an Elder belt here or a Shaper belt there, but Stygian Vises are just so dang good, especially for the fact that you can stick an Abyssal Jewel in them. So anyway, we're going for life and resistances here with our belt, and then the Abyssal that's going to go in there is, of course, a bunch of damage added to spells and life as we're able. Of course, the various flask setups can be set up however it is that you like them to be set up, but all of these these particular flasks are set up with defensive reaction statuses. So we've got remove to bleed, immunity to bleed, and remove bleed on 2 different flasks here. And then we've got increased cast speed on our basalt flask. And then we've got a diamond flask in order to crit a whole bunch. And then we've got the Cinder Swallow Urn, which is very, very helpful for recovery. It's a great quality of life item that you will need to farm the Mastermind in order to get. In terms of your Watcher's Eye, what you're going for in the end game, you're looking for a Watcher's Eye that gives you the leech lifed while life leeched. There we go. Life leeched as affected while affected by vitality. The key portion of this is that you're using vitality to recover your HP, so you don't necessarily need a whole bunch of life leech before you actually get this. A lot of people don't necessarily like using vitality. It's a great way to build in some regen into your build. It's not like top tier. It's not like something that, you know, you need to build your entire build around vitality, but it's just another layer. And if you can get a Watcher's Eye that uses vitality, these aren't typically very expensive Watcher's Eyes, because realistically the only other people who are in the market for vitality Watcher's Eye stuff is Righteous Fire players, and there's not a whole lot of those in softcore trade anyway. So if you can get your hands on a Watcher's Eye that gives you life leeched while affected by vitality, it will be a pretty big quality of life upgrade for your build. Then, of course, you've got 1 socket left for your hazardous research jewel, and if you want to fit in another one, then you can do that as so, because there's still a few points that you can mess around with on the tree. Anyway, that is Leet Fun's Spark Inquisitor for you to league start with. You can, of course, drop a comment down below with your own thoughts and your own changes, your own twists on the build, and with your own ideas for what you'll be league starting in 3.9 Metamorph League. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope 3.9 is a league when a Mirror of Calandra drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.